Hi everybody, welcome back to Sociology. Today we're going to be doing a very important, dense, and surprisingly relevant topic nowadays, race and ethnicity. Now race and ethnicity, like I said, is complicated. It can be a semester's worth of material, it can be an entire degree's worth of material, it can be an entire lifetime's worth of material. But today we're just going to do a brief overview, some core important concepts and definitions so that you can have a better understanding as you leave this course. I'm going to do my best here. I'm normally in front of a whiteboard, but I will bring you the best that I can for this topic. Okay, so race. Now, race is very difficult to define. In fact, why don't you try to define it for yourself right now? Something having to do with different types of people or groups of people, or did you think of color? Very often that's the first defining trait that we go to. I'm just going to give you the first definition for race. This is not the definition, this is just a definition that I found online. Each of the major divisions of humankind having distinct physical characteristics. Now if you think about that definition, each of the major divisions of humankind. That could be male and female. That could be pubescent, post-pubescent. Okay, that could be decent kidney function, poor kidney function. And then it goes on to saying having distinct physical characteristics. Again, unless you have an identical twin, we all have distinct physical characteristics. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right now and let you know that race and ethnicity are social constructs. Now, social constructs are something that we've talked a lot about. I will prove that by the end shortly. I'll have a definitive proof that race is a social construct. You can go online, and there are some white nationalists on YouTube right now that will have videos entitled that race is not a social construct, and that people like me are just lying and indoctrinating you into some sort of brainwashing concept. But I think by the end of this video, you will come to see that there is no alternative to race being a social construct. None whatsoever. Anyway, that's the definition that they have here online. I'm going to give you my own definition coming up shortly. But before we do that, I'd like to talk to you about the history of race. Because race has a very interesting history. The ancients actually had no concept of race. All right? They would talk about peoples, they would talk about nations, and this is Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, Greece, and the East as well. All talked about peoples or tribes, or nations. These were the types of the way they would group people, or especially religion. They avoided the term race because they didn't really have it as a concept, that there could be this other group of people separate in some indefinable way. And to this day, it's still ill-defined. Race didn't actually come into print in the West until about 1580. This is not a coincidence. This coincided with the age of exploration. And there's a reason for that. Because when you start traveling the world in boats, as Europe did, with superior weapons and ships, you begin to covet the lands of other people. Okay? Now, important thread throughout the age of exploration was also the spread of religion. If you run into other people, your goal would be to Christianize them. And this was often the goal, is why they sent missionaries with every ship to make sure that Christianity was brought to the people. However, you also did want their resources. You wanted their land. You wanted whatever else you could get from, silver, especially gold, very especially. Now, you can't exactly steal from people if you're a good Christian. And this is Europe's dilemma in around 1580. There is a way around this, however. You're also not allowed to enslave people to force them into work. Notice how I say people. If they were able to develop a category that was like a person, but somewhat similar. There may be a moral jujitsu that you could pull to enslave people, but not, of course, use that word necessarily, enlighten people through labor, and take their land and resources. And this is when they began to develop the concept of race. And race fit this new mold that enabled you to treat people less than you would your, say, fellow white person. In the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, they would have had no use for a concept of race because they would never have encountered anyone, the Saracens, okay, so the Crusades were definitely part of that, but they weren't necessarily another race, they were just heathen, all right, so that was how they categorized it as opposed to subhuman. But when they encountered people throughout in the Africa, the Americas, and Southeast Asia, they were so physically different that it was easy for them to have this concept. When I say physically different, we'll get to melanin in a second, those are physical characteristics. It was easy to visualize this new concept that divided those people from what the Europeans were familiar with. You were therefore able to take their land, enslave them, and essentially treat them as you would an animal. Dominion over land and beast. Okay. That's the initial role that race played. And then they spent about 200 years trying, 300, well, up to almost to today, unfortunately, trying to justify this through science or, again, through rhetoric or some sort of unscientific methods. And that's called eugenics, but we'll get to there anyway. But let me tell you again, and this is going to be a common theme, it was all social construct. And again, social constructs are simply agreed upon concepts that only exist in groups. Okay? They're not real unless everybody thinks that they're real.